AR's 28th birthday celebration, someone presented him with a woman right in front of me, breaking my usual calm demeanor. I shattered a wine glass in anger and caused chaos at the party. I left the event alone with my luggage, and people whispered that Alani, with no one to support her, would return in 3 days defeated. But AR didn't care at all, dismissing her as an orphan, with nowhere to go without the Ari's family. As the days passed, some even speculated that I had perished, and only then did AR finally reach out. However, my number had already been disconnected. Later, at a famous artist's exhibition, a side-profile portrait caught AR's attention, prompting him to offer an outrageous sum to buy it. Antonio, apologizing, explained, "This is my favorite portrait of my wife, and I can't bring myself to sell it." At AR's 28th birthday banquet, I wore a stunning dress and walked arm in arm with him. But as we descended the stairs, he let go of my hand, leaving me standing alone. All eyes were on AR as he mingled, and I faded into the background. One by one, people presented their gifts to AR, and he dismissively had the butler collect them. But when a stunning beauty was presented to him, the attention shifted back to me, with sympathetic, mocking, and entertained gazes. AR's usual blank expression shifted briefly, seeing how the woman resembled his late first love. "Giving me a woman in front of Alani, you certainly have guts," AR teased. The gift giver tried to please him, saying, "Alani is generous, she won't mind." It wasn't that I didn't care, but they assumed I wouldn't dare object. How could I, an orphan raised by the Aries family, challenge the new head of the family? AR twirled his wedding ring with a playful smile. "Since Alani has agreed, take her away." Before he could finish, I was already beside him, glancing at the beauty. The gift giver clearly knew exactly what AR liked. A wave of exhaustion hit me, and I realized I couldn't keep pretending. As my grandmother had taught me, I gently nudged the champagne tower behind me, and the crystal glasses came crashing down with a soft touch. Wine and glass shards spread everywhere, plunging the event into chaos. Someone cried out, "Alani's gone mad." I had ruined AR's birthday party, but he seemed unaffected. The butler immediately began arranging for the guests to leave, and the staff quickly cleaned up the mess. The beauty stood silently beside AR, her manner eerily similar to his first love, while I appeared unhinged in comparison. AR casually held the beauty's fingers, barely glancing at me, and said, "Why are you so angry? If you don't want to see her, I'll have her stay somewhere else." The woman next to him attempted to calm me. "Alani, why get upset? A man like AR could never have just one woman. I admire him, but it won't affect your place." I removed the ring from my finger and placed it on the table before AR. He raised an eyebrow and picked up the ring, tossing it in the air, the diamond flashing briefly before falling back into his hand. He threw it behind him, handing it to the woman. "A few $1 million ring, and Alani tosses it aside like it's nothing." AR stood up with a cold laugh and told the butler, "Get a few teachers to teach my wife some manners. I don't want to see this kind of behavior again." After walking a few steps, he turned back and threw his own ring on the ground. It rolled and stopped at my feet. "If you don't want the ring, throw them all away." AR left with his entourage, and the sound of the car engine roared in the night. The butler sighed beside me. "Madam, why did you have to upset the master? You know he holds a grudge against you." I picked up the ring and tossed it into the trash. "Dean, you can go. Don't worry about me." The butler sighed again and left. I went upstairs, changed out of my extravagant dress, put on a white shirt, and began packing my things. Other couples might consider divorce agreements after a fight, but AR and I were bound by nothing but rings. No one would have known that the wedding that shocked the city had no legal marriage certificate. I still remembered AR's words at the wedding. "Only one name can go on my household register, Susan. You shouldn't have married me." But I married him anyway. The man I had loved since my teenage years, hoping I could win his heart one day. In the end, I became the figurehead, Alani, recognized by name only. As I dragged my suitcase out of the villa, it was eerily quiet, reminding me of the rainy night when my grandmother first brought me home. A 13-year-old AR stood on the stairs, coldly staring at me before heading to the kitchen. He brought me a cup of warm milk. I booked a flight, flew for 6 hours, then drove another 3, returning to a small, remote southern town. They say when people grow old, they long for their roots. But I realized that anyone without a home feels that yearning, even if that home no longer has family. I rented a small courtyard in the town. The local dialect sounded both familiar and strange. I had left when I was young, and had lived in the northern city for years, forgetting how to speak it. Fortunately, my neighbor in the courtyard, who had just arrived before me, helped me when I couldn't understand the old woman's dialect while buying groceries. The next day, I made corn pancakes to thank him for his help. I learned that he was an artist here for inspiration, freshly out of college, brimming with youthful enthusiasm. When Grandma wanted to uproot them, AR had flown into a rage. "If the roses are gone, there's no need for me to come home." After that, Colette and the roses were never mentioned again. They became untouchable in the Aries household. One afternoon, there was a knock at my courtyard door. Antonio, wearing a hoodie and carrying a backpack, greeted me with a cheerful smile. When I opened the door, he said, "Sister, I'm planning to go up the mountain to paint. Want to join me for some fresh air?" Antonio, being experienced, quickly gathered both camping and art supplies, refusing my offer to help. "I'm strong. It's no trouble to carry this stuff." As we hiked, we talked about the past and the future. My past seemed dull, revolving around AR and Aries, leaving me with nothing but the empty title of Alani. Antonio, however, was different, always sharing new stories and dreams for the future. Life is an experience. Right now, my dream is to become a famous artist, and I'm going to give it my best shot. When we reached the mountaintop, we watched the sunset. The golden light bathed us, creating a surreal beauty. I looked down at the small town below, now covered in golden light, peaceful and serene. Antonio finished setting up the tent, then handed me food and water. He lay on the mat beside me, hands behind his head, staring up at the sky, now glittering with stars. "Sister, you should try looking at the stars like this. It's a completely different feeling." I had never thought of lying down to watch the stars. But now Antonio didn't give me time to think. He tugged me onto the mat beside him. "Come on, lie down." I followed his lead without hesitation. Once I lay down, the stars felt so close, as if I could touch them. In my heart, I made a decision to be brave, to stop running away and start making new friends, exploring the world. One day, even if AR stood right in front of me, he wouldn't matter anymore. Later that night, I fell into a deep sleep. Despite being in a simple tent, I felt more at peace than ever. The next morning, I groggily stepped out of the tent and found Antonio already working with his easel. His expression serious, The rising sun gently kissed my skin as I gazed toward the horizon, where the sun was beginning its ascent. This was my new beginning. "Sister, don't move!" Antonio's excited voice startled me. I froze, only able to glance at him from the corner of my eye. Apparently, he was using me as a model. Once he finished painting, I stretched my stiff neck. Being a model was harder than I thought. "Let me massage your neck," Antonio said. "Thanks for being my model." His hands were strong, and I closed my eyes, enjoying the relief of his massage. On the way down the mountain, Antonio eagerly talked about his newfound inspiration. I saw the painting, and though I couldn't appreciate much beyond that, I could tell it looked good. When we returned, Antonio disappeared. I entered his house, turned on the TV, and was startled when AR's face suddenly appeared on the screen, causing me to step back. My hand hovered over the remote, but I hesitated. I was thankful for the decision I had made the previous night. AR frequently appeared on TV and online, but I knew I couldn't keep running away. In the news interview, AR seemed unchanged, even when asked about the rumors regarding marital problems. His expression remained indifferent as he replied, "She had a tantrum. She'll come back after some time away." People often envied me, an orphan raised by AR's grandmother, who later married into the Aries family, believing it was a blessing from a past life. But only those close to us knew the truth. I felt invisible to everyone, resented by AR, and reduced to just the name Alani in the Aries family. I was like a drifting weed with no roots. Each year, when the yellow roses bloomed, AR would have the staff cut them and place them in vases throughout the house. The piano in the glass conservatory was wiped down every day by the staff. Though Colette was gone, AR constantly reminded me of her presence. "Is it true that your argument with Alani had to do with your assistant, who you've been seen with recently?" asked the interviewer. AR frowned, annoyed, and instinctively reached for his wedding ring, only to remember it was no longer on his finger. He recalled how Alani had returned the ring, standing firm and daring to leave. He remembered the panic in the butler's voice when he called, saying, "Madam is gone." When AR got home, half of Alani's closet was emptied, with only his suits remaining untouched. It was Alani's way of forcing him to send away the woman who resembled Colette. He knew that Alani cared most about Colette's belongings, especially anyone who resembled her. But so what? Grandma was gone, and Alani had no family left. Her only support was him. As a child, she would hide when she felt upset, and Grandma would spoil her. Now, AR didn't have the patience to search for her. Sooner or later, she would return, realizing that life outside the Aries family wasn't as easy. He had told the butler, "She's an orphan. Where else can she go? No one is allowed to look for her. Let me know when she comes back." With AR's impatience growing, the host quickly shifted the conversation to business. When the topic turned to work, AR seemed more relaxed. It was clear that the mere mention of Alani made him frown. I poured myself a glass of ice water and took out my laptop to work on my resume. In this small town, most of the people who stayed were the elderly. It was a great place for retirement, but offered very few job opportunities. If I wanted to work, I would have to go elsewhere. I rode out until evening, then stretched and began preparing dinner, a simple meal with 3 dishes and a soup. As I sat down at the table, I suddenly thought of Antonio, my neighbor. I wondered if he was finished with his work. When he painted, did he become as absorbed as AR did in his work, often forgetting to eat? Back when my grandmother was still around, AR would often get stomach aches from skipping meals. So, whenever I could, I would bring him food to his office. At first, his secretary would stop me at the door, and I'd wait for an hour or two. Eventually, AR became used to it and would let me interrupt his work so he could eat before continuing. I sighed, threw on a jacket, and knocked on Antonio's door. I heard nothing from inside, but just as I was about to leave, the gate opened. Antonio's initial impatient look softened into a smile when he saw me. "Big sis, I was just painting you, and here you are at my door." Antonio had a paintbrush in his hand, and his clothes and face were splattered with paint, giving him a messy but vibrant appearance. "Have you eaten yet? Want to come over for dinner?" When Antonio heard my invitation, he dramatically clutched his stomach. "I'm starving! You always take care of me, big sis. Let me just put down my brush." In the following days, it seemed that Antonio and I had come to an unspoken arrangement. He came over for meals every day and helped me clean up before leaving. He even took over the gardening tasks, planting flowers and vegetables in my yard. It was a shame I didn't have a brother. If I did, I would have wanted him to be like Antonio. I sent my resume to a few companies and received several interview invitations. The day I decided to leave, I woke up early to say goodbye to Antonio. As I opened the door, I noticed several black sedans parked in front of his house. A few men in suits, likely bodyguards, were standing next to the cars. I hesitated for a few minutes before walking over. As I approached, one of the bodyguards reached out to stop me. "Don't touch her," Antonio said, coming out of the house. His usual sunny demeanor was replaced with a cold seriousness. He grabbed my hand and pulled me into the yard, slamming the gate behind us. "You all stay outside," he ordered. The bodyguards exchanged looks, but eventually agreed. "Big sis, did you come to invite me to dinner without the bodyguards?" Antonio's tone regained some of his usual cheerfulness. "No, I came to say goodbye," I replied. Antonio's voice suddenly rose. "Where are you going?" I explained how I had sent out resumes and received interview invitations. Even though the town was great, I wanted to give myself a fresh start and live without regrets. "So, have you let go of that person in your heart, big sis?" Antonio asked, catching me off guard. I looked at him in confusion. Antonio blinked at me. "Don't treat me like a kid. An artist's eyes are sharp, you know." His straightforwardness made me feel a bit embarrassed. "Yeah, I guess I have," I finally said. "Where are you planning to work, big sis?" Antonio asked. "North City," I replied. Though I had considered moving to a city further away from AR, I'd spent my entire life in North City, ever since my grandmother took me in. I grew up there, went to school, and made friends. Why should I force myself to live somewhere unfamiliar just because of AR? There was no need to go through the trouble of adjusting to a new place. "Then I'll go with you, big sis," Antonio said. "My family's looking for me anyway." To my surprise, I ended up riding in Antonio's car to North City, with the anxiety of facing AR slowly fading as Antonio chatted endlessly about his plans. Life in North City went much smoother than I had anticipated. The interview went well, and I received a notice to start the following week. I rented an apartment close to the company. However, after disappearing for 2 days, Antonio showed up as my new neighbor. One day, as I was taking out the trash, I saw workers moving furniture into the apartment next door. A quick glance inside revealed Antonio, tall and lean, directing the workers on where to place the furniture. "What are you doing here?" I asked. I wanted to surprise you, but I guess you caught me, Antonio replied, naturally bending down to take the trash bag from my hand. I've been missing your cooking, so I moved next door to mooch off of you again. His unexpected appearance was actually a pleasant surprise. Living in a strange place felt safer with him as my neighbor. All right, I'll cook a few dishes later to celebrate your move. We decided to have a hot pot at home. The red oil broth boiled away, and Antonio fished out a piece of tripe, placing it in my bowl. After one bite, the spiciness hit me, and I quickly grabbed my drink to wash it down. So you can't handle spicy food? Antonio teased. You said you loved hot pot, so I thought it'd be fine, I said, trying to brush it off. Maybe I'm just not used to it anymore, I added. How long had it been since I last had hot pot? I couldn't remember. It used to be my favorite food when my grandmother was still alive. We would have it together. She'd have the mild broth, and I'd have the spicy one. Once, when AR was working late, the food I brought him had already gotten cold. Since it was snowing outside, I suggested we go out to eat instead. I took him to a hot pot restaurant. AR always preferred light flavors, so I ordered a split pot with both spicy and mild broths. But the entire time, AR frowned. On the way back, he said, "Don't eat that again. It leaves a smell all over you." After that, I never had spicy hot pot again. If you stop eating something long enough, even your taste buds forget what they once loved. But soon enough, I was sweating, rediscovering the joy of eating hot pot. After dinner, Antonio cleaned up the table, tidied the kitchen, opened the windows for ventilation, and even took out the trash. Life in North City turned out to be much more peaceful than I had expected. The media stopped talking about Alani, and no one from AR's family came looking for me. I guess I was never important enough for anyone to care. The media had become increasingly curious about AR's assistant, who was always by his side. I casually scrolled through the photos secretly taken by paparazzi. How ironic. Did AR really love Colette that much? In the photos, AR bent down, letting the woman adjust his tie. And when getting into the car, he carefully protected her head. On a rainy day, the woman held the umbrella high over him while he tilted it toward her. So love for someone could be transferred so easily, just because of a similar face. AR had always been very protective of Colette's identity. No photos of her had ever been leaked. Everyone speculated whether AR had completely abandoned me. If I was still in the Aries house, I might be waiting for a husband who wouldn't come home. But now I was busy organizing plans and attending meetings. Antonio, I told you not to act so clingy with me, I said, pushing his head off my shoulder. Antonio, dissatisfied, pushed my laptop aside and said, "Aren't I a big, handsome guy right in front of you? Why are you daydreaming about an old man?" It was the first time I'd heard someone call AR an old man. I couldn't help but laugh at the thought of how AR would react if he heard that. When I finally stopped laughing and looked up, I noticed Antonio had a serious expression. "Is he the one who hurt you before? Aries from the family conglomerate?" "I know him," he said. I looked at him in surprise. As far as I remembered, I had never seen Antonio at AR's house when I was little. My mum had made me call him Uncle. I burst into laughter, clutching my stomach and collapsing onto the couch. "He's only 4 years older than you, and you called him Uncle?" Antonio pinched my cheek. "He looks older. AR had been involved in the company since childhood and appeared more mature than his peers." So, are you the missing Alani from the Aris family? Antonio's face suddenly came closer, and only then did I realize that, in the midst of our laughter, I had ended up resting my head on his lap. I quickly tried to push him away and sit up, but for once, he wasn't as easygoing as usual. He looked at me, as if determined to get an answer. So, does that make me your secret lover? He joked. I slapped him lightly, laughing, and told him not to talk nonsense. Besides, I've already left AR's house and returned the ring to him. Great. I'll get a lawyer, and we'll have you divorced by tomorrow, he joked. No need, I replied, smiling bitterly. We never had a marriage certificate. Without a certificate, there was no need for a divorce. The only thing tying us together was the ring, a symbol of marriage. Maybe AR had been with Alani for so long that he forgot we didn't even have a certificate. Perfect, Antonio said. Why don't you help me get one then? When I held the freshly printed marriage certificate in my hand, I momentarily lost my thoughts. Back then, I had imagined AR's name would be on the certificate, never thinking that the groom would be someone else. Last night, after Antonio's constant urging, I had agreed to pretend to be married to appease his family. Antonio took the certificate from my hand. I'll take this back and show it to my family. Otherwise, my mom will keep thinking I'm lying to her. The marriage didn't feel real at all. 3 years ago, there had been an extravagant wedding, full of ceremonies, but without a certificate, it all seemed like a show for the outside world. Now, I held the certificate but hadn't had a wedding. It felt more grounded, perhaps, because there were no expectations. And with no expectations, there could be no disappointments. Antonio came back with good news. After showing the certificate to my family, they've agreed to let me hold an art exhibition. It's going to be my best work. A month later, Antonio's exhibition was a success. I had to work late that day and didn't leave the office until nearly 8 p.m. When I arrived at the exhibition, I noticed someone who looked a lot like AR standing near the entrance. I shook my head, thinking it must be someone with a similar build. Inside the gallery, many of the paintings seemed familiar. A few girls walked by me excitedly, holding their catalogues. Hurry! Hurry! Antonio's just up ahead. We have to get his autograph. This time, I heard it's his last exhibition. If we miss it, we won't be able to get a signed piece again. I followed their gaze and saw Antonio towering over the crowd, patiently signing autographs. I thought this was his first exhibition. How could it be his last? I scanned the room and noticed a biography of Antonio near the entrance. It turned out he was already a well-known artist, with past works that had been displayed nationwide, selling for astronomical prices. Suddenly, I felt hesitant to approach him. The Antonio described in that bio didn't seem like the same playful, clingy boy who was always around me. I quietly left. As I exited, I saw Aris standing by the roadside, frowning while speaking on the phone. So, I hadn't been mistaken earlier. Aris was repeatedly dialing a number he would have never called before. Even though he knew it would only lead to an automated message saying Alani's number was no longer in service, he didn't know any other way to contact her. Seeing the painting earlier had shaken him. The woman in the portrait resembled Alani, but wasn't quite the same. Her eyes were full of life, brighter than the sunrise behind her, radiant and full of vitality. Alani wasn't like that. She was more like still water, showing no ripples. Even a clay figure could have a temper, but Alani was like water. Squeeze her, and not even the slightest spark of anger would show. When pushed too far, she would simply hide. He had once seen her crying near the greenhouse, and upon hearing his footsteps, she had run to her room like a frightened kitten. Back then, he had hated how she could never stand up for herself. Despite being Alani, she only pretended to be composed in public. But once back in the Aries household, she reverted to her timid self. He had wanted to buy the painting and hang it in Alani's room so that she could see it every day, hoping it would inspire her. But Antonio had said, "This is my favorite portrait of my wife. Sorry, I can't part with it." For some reason, hearing those words gave AR a strange sense of relief. The woman in the painting wasn't Alani after all. Yet, after leaving the exhibition, he suddenly felt an intense urge to find Alani. She had been angry for long enough. It was time for her to come back. After hearing the automated message again, AR lost his patience and turned to his bodyguards. "Find my wife, and when you do, bring her back." The bodyguards arrived at Antonio's house while he was setting the table for dinner. When the door opened, they rushed in, but Antonio blocked their way. "Who are you looking for?" The bodyguard's eyes landed on me as I held a spatula. "Madam, Aries wants you to come back." It had been months since I last heard that title, and for a moment, it felt like a lifetime ago. "Don't call her that. She's my wife now," Antonio said, pushing the bodyguards out the door. They exchanged glances, and one of them dialed Aries. "Aries, it seems like she's married." Aries arrived faster than I had expected. Within minutes, he was standing at the door, his face dark and furious. The bodyguards stepped aside, and AR tried to push past Antonio, but Antonio wouldn't budge. "Pull him away from me!" Aries shouted angrily. "Aries, you barged into my house trying to take my wife. That doesn't seem right, does it?" Antonio shot back. Only now did AR finally meet Antonio's eyes. "So, the person in your painting is my wife. Shouldn't you be explaining things to me?" "Explain what?" "We already have our marriage certificate. She's my legal wife," Antonio said, his voice firm. AR sneered, his gaze now locking with mine from a distance. "Alani, you've really become bold, haven't you? Running off behind my back to marry someone else. Come back now, and I'll pretend nothing happened." He extended his hand toward me. In the past, whenever he reached out, I would always take his hand without hesitation. But this time, I didn't move. "Aries, I've already returned the ring. From now on, we're even." "Even?" AR's eyes reddened with confusion. Antonio wasn't quick enough, and AR rushed forward, grabbing my hand tightly, nearly crushing my wrist. "You'll go divorce him right now, isn't that what you'll do? What you wanted was for me to marry you, right? Fine, get the divorce, and we'll get the certificate," I said. With my free hand, I slapped Aries across the face. The entire room fell silent. It took him a moment to process what had just happened. "Aries, what are you getting worked up for? I've left your family, and I no longer care about that marriage certificate. You can take anyone home now, and we can both move on, okay?" "Then why should I let you go?" Aries snapped. "My family raised you. If you're going to die, you'll die as part of the Aries family." Suddenly, Aries lifted me. But just as we neared the door, he was stopped by Antonio's bodyguards who had just emerged from the elevator. "Aries, if you take her today, I'll have you charged with kidnapping," one of the bodyguards warned. "Surely you don't think I can't protect my own wife, do you?" I was still in shock, never expecting such a scene to unfold. I thought that by leaving, Ares would feel relieved. I even thought that suggesting we part ways would make him happy. But now, this drama. Who was it all for? The tension in the room quickly escalated, and soon, the bodyguards from both sides were fighting. Antonio joined in, and fortunately, he won. Though he took a punch from Ares on the left side of his face, which looked quite painful. Ares, you're too old for this kind of brawling. You should stop pretending to be tough, I said, tugging on Antonio's sleeve, worried that Ares might retaliate. Ares had never been involved in a fight before, and now he was in a pathetic state. Even the bodyguards had bruises. You guys take him back, I ordered, pulling Antonio back inside the house. Antonio covered his face and frowned. Honey, he hit me hard. Do you think it left a mark? I grabbed the first aid kit. Stop calling me that. Let me put some ointment on it for you. As I got closer, he turned his head and kissed me on the lips. That works much better than ointment. You didn't mind when I called you wife earlier in front of Ares, though. I shoved the iodine solution into his hand. You said we were just getting the certificate, not really getting married. Antonio smirked, looking satisfied. I just wanted a legal claim on you so no one with the last name Lou could take you from me. You tricked me into marriage. Yeah, and I gave up my job at the company for it, he teased. If this is a trick, I'm stuck with it for life. If you divorce me, I won't just lose a wife. I'll be stuck working for the company forever. How tragic would that be? Finally, I understood why he had said earlier that it would be his last art exhibition. I poked his injured cheek. You're such an idiot. Well, then don't leave me. At least I'll be happily suffering for the rest of my life, he replied. I nodded, and Antonio took that as his cue to push further. Wife, can I kiss you openly now? Before I could answer, his lips were already on mine. The situation spiraled, and Antonio acted like a kid who had just gotten his candy. By the time I tried to push him away, I had already melted in his arms. Antonio, stop, I said. But he reassured me. Don't worry, I'll be gentle. In that moment, I finally understood what Antonio meant when he talked about his stamina. Antonio moved us to a new house, saying he was worried that Ares might come and harass us again. We enjoyed peace for a while, until Antonio took me to a bridal shop to pick out a wedding dress. I had no idea we were even planning a wedding. I've been preparing since the day we got our certificate. When I painted that portrait, I was already dreaming of making you my beautiful bride, Antonio said. He was involved in every detail of the wedding planning, and occasionally, his mother would pull me aside to ask for my opinion on certain things. One day, while we were choosing a hotel, we unexpectedly ran into Ares in the courtyard garden. I wanted to avoid him, but he saw me first. San, come back. I'll take care of you, like Grandma wanted. Isn't our family your home? Are you going to abandon both me and our home? I pulled my hand out of his grasp. I spent so many years in the Ares family, but you never treated me like family. Now, I found a new family. Please don't disturb me anymore. Antonio's parents adored me, especially after learning that my parents had passed away and I had no other relatives. Antonio's mother hugged me, tears streaming down her face, saying she would be my mother from now on. I loved the home Antonio had given me. It was a place where I truly belonged. In the Ares family, my only relative had been Grandma, and with her gone, there was nothing left to miss. I saw Antonio come out, and I waved, running toward him. He wrapped my coat tighter around me and whispered some details to the hotel manager. Aries stood there, his gaze fixed on my retreating figure, but I never looked back. Bonus scene. AR's perspective. I prided myself on never misjudging anyone in business, but somehow I had never truly understood Alani, the person closest to me. I thought she was dependent on me, easy to control. But after one trip away, she came back stronger. When Grandma insisted we marry, I agreed. But I only staged a wedding for her. I deliberately didn't register our marriage, and she endured it without even complaining to Grandma. I purposely placed Colette's favorite yellow roses in front of her, watching her face turn pale, finally understanding what had bothered her. So when the woman who looked like Colette appeared in front of me, I agreed without hesitation. As expected, Alani's face turned sour. But I never imagined she would lose her temper and throw away our wedding ring. I had always thought of her as just a runaway child. I never realized she had grown up without me noticing. I was no longer her only support. She had a job, new friends, and even got married. I waited downstairs for the bodyguards to bring her back, only to hear them say she was already married. I almost dropped my phone. She said she wanted to cut ties with me, determined to sever all connections for the rest of her life. In my agitation, I lost control and resorted to violence. But in the end, I couldn't even win against that brat. I remember disliking him when we were kids. I was only a few years older than him, and yet he called me uncle. Now that he's grown, I dislike him even more. But when Alani saw he was hurt, her eyes were full of concern. Maybe she didn't even realize it herself. Her eyes were only on that brat, while when she faced me, all I saw was caution. Suddenly, I felt like I had lost something I might never get back. The invitation to their wedding ended up in my hands, and the smiles on their faces in the photo were blinding. Back then, we had our own grand wedding, but I was so indifferent that I didn't even bother to take a photo with her. I left everything to the butler, staying detached like I was just a guest at my own wedding. She must have been disappointed by that wedding, right? All these years, I grew used to having her by my side, took her efforts for granted, and assumed she would always be there. It wasn't until now that I realized some people, once lost, will never belong to me again. She no longer wants the Aries family, and I, too, have been left behind forever, trapped in the Aries family.